Hi, I'm Susan Casey, and welcome to Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. I am thrilled to be bringing this new show on grief and loss and the transformations that can happen when people have gone through a traumatic event. I'm a therapist, a podcaster, and an author, and it is a privilege to be here with all of you today. I have two special guests that I would like to introduce you to today. I've got Karen Bruder and her daughter Stephanie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming today. I cannot tell you how much it means to me that you guys were able to make it on the show. And for our listeners who don't know, both of you have been on my podcast. Stephanie, you were the very first to show up on my podcast to tell us the story of your father, and Karen, your husband. Mm-hmm. And what I'd like to do is for you guys to talk about Bob and just a little bit about his depression and mental health. For our listeners, Bob took his life September 25th, 2019. And today we're just going to be talking about your journey of grief and what that looked like for you after Bob died, and what you've done since then to really take this horrific tragedy to change the way in which you even think about life. So let's start with you, Karen. Tell us a little bit about Bob, who he was, and anything else you'd like us to know.
Yeah, Bob was a tremendous person that I was attracted to him because he was one of those people that led by example. He was adored by his co-workers and colleagues, and he just had a really lovely way of interacting with people. He was emotionally intelligent beyond words, and that's what sort of drew me to him. And I think that that's a lot. It says a lot when you see a funeral of the person that has touched so many lives and the room is overflowing. He was really, really beloved.
Yeah, and there were like 450 people that showed up, correct?
At least.
Yeah, and before we jump into you, Stephanie, I just want to preface this because I know this story. Obviously, I've interviewed both of you in the past, and that Bob had shown some signs of depression when you were in a relationship. He was your second marriage, but you just chalked that up to that he was a little nervous about getting into the relationship, that maybe he was a little self-reserved.
Right. And I took it on, I think myself, his hesitance to commit, or the periods of time when he would withdraw and become sort of detached in the relationship, thinking, to myself, well, of course, why wouldn't he need some space? I've gone through a really difficult divorce, and the relationship between my first husband and myself was still really tenuous, and I had 3 young children, and here's a bachelor coming in who wants to sign up for this, Mm-hmm. So I just, I saw it as a means to just refocus. He's got to just figure this out. I can't change what I'm bringing into the relationship. If he needs space and time, that's what he needs. And then, those periods of time over 20 years, 24 years together became, much more frequent. The interval in between, where they originally started out every 6 to 8 months, became 3 to 6 months, 2 to 4 months, 1 to 2 months.
So he was progressing in his mental illness. And how about you, Stephanie? Like you were, of course, you were this young child. I'm sure, I know, Karen, you tried to protect your children because Bob was drinking and things like that, is self-medicating his own anxiety and depressive symptoms. What about you? Did you have any idea what was going on?
Originally, I didn't really have an idea. I always kind of saw that he would pull back, but I was like, he works a lot. Like, it never struck me as odd. I think I was about 10 years old when, I don't remember if he was part of the conversation, but you and I talked, And I remember feeling incredibly embarrassed that my dad had a problem. And I was told not to tell anyone about it. And so as soon as that conversation happened, I started picking up on the signs, and I would mark the bottles. And I don't really know. It never was very present in my life the way it was in my mother's.
Right.
Because she protected me.
And it's painful, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and let me just say that to all of our listeners. Any kind of mental health addiction, they often go hand in hand. People self-medicate when they have anxiety and depression, and there's so much stigma that families do kind of try to keep it a secret because, for all of the reasons, to protect your spouse, right? Because he had a big job, to protect the children, and meanwhile, what's going on for you as that mother trying to protect everyone, including your husband? What's happening for you?
Right. It was really difficult. There was, as much as I, loved him and wanted to support him and help him be healthy, there was also the part of me that knew I couldn't do it for him. It had to come from him. Mm-hmm. And it was lonely. I oftentimes felt like a single married parent, because, I'd want to take the kids, let's say, to the beach on a beautiful late spring day to go fly kites, and he wouldn't be up to it. I mean, I can look at photographs now and say, yep, he didn't want to come. Yep, that's another one, he didn't want to come. Yeah, and so I did a lot of things with the kids by myself because he wasn't emotionally able to participate with us.
And you can look at those photographs and kind of gauge where he was in the illness, right?
Absolutely.
If he was active, because I know there were times he would be sober,
right,
and he wouldn't
right,
drink. I want us to move into when Bob took his life, but right before that, I know that you were deeply worried about it, right? I mean, that like for you, you started to check on him more, mm-hmm, go home more, and there was an attempt. But although he said he didn't actually,
right,
it was not a real attempt, but that he took too many sleeping pills. Is that what it was?
Right. So 6 months before he died, he had been home, he had been in a depressive state, and he had been self-medicating with alcohol, working from home, and something had happened where Stephanie said something to me, and I was leaving for work, which was just down the road, and I told him when I got home later on that we would go to a recovery center. I would take him if he were ready. So he said, "Does Stephanie know?" My response was, "I think she suspects that you're drinking again," because of course, his hope was that he could keep the promises he made when he said to Steph and Adam, "I'm not going to drink anymore."
And he didn't want to.
He didn't, and I think he felt like a failure because the day before, I had noticed a large bottle of just an over-the-counter generic brand of sleeping pills. And the reason it struck me was because they were purple, bright purple. It happens to be my favorite color, and I'd never seen purple ones before. We've just, always had a simple blue kind. And then I got home to check on him, and he was unresponsive, and the ambulance came, took him to the hospital. I thought it was alcohol related, and the emergency room doctor asked if it was possible it was something else, and I immediately thought, oh my goodness.
He tried to take his life.
And when I looked at the bottle after the fact, the whole bottle was empty, and it wasn't a little tiny bottle, it was the big.
And what was going on with you guys at this point when this happened with your dad? Did you know what happened? Did you try to protect her from that as well? What did you know about?
I actually didn't find out that he had attempted or even was in the ICU until after he passed. I was told he was in rehab and he was going to be there for a little bit, mm-hmm, and that he was getting better.
Stephanie, I want to hear, because I worked with young adults for many, many years when I was doing direct practice, and I know that parents do whatever they can to protect their children. In hindsight, I mean, you could, what did that feel like for you now, knowing what you know? Are you glad you didn't know? Do you wish that your mother had had a conversation with you? Tell me where you are now with hindsight.
Yeah. I guess I'm glad that I wish I had known, because that's who I am. I like to know things up front and be present and part of it. But as a child, that's not something I should have to deal with, and
Right.
she took that off of me.
Right.
And of course I was a little upset that I didn't know all the details until after. But now that I have that hindsight, I guess I'm a lot happier that I got to have that childhood that I was kind of oblivious.
That's a beautiful insight, quite frankly, because that was your goal, right?
Right.
And so let's move into 6 months after that attempt. I am very aware of that this could be painful for you guys to talk about, so please only talk about what is comfortable for you. Stephanie, you found your father. We don't have to go into all of the graphic details. He took his life by hanging, and you found him in the garage. And I know the horrors around that. I mean, that I could only imagine. And I want to talk about what your early grief looked like, but then all of the things that you have done since 2019 as you have begun to heal and integrate this tremendous loss into your life. It doesn't matter to me who goes first, whoever feels moved to.
Okay. So I did find my father. At first it didn't register. I was unusually excited for Halloween. I was like, it's just a decoration. So I couldn't tell you how long I stood there until I realized what I was looking at. And I ran back inside the house, and I took my dog outside, and I called my mom. I kind of just shut down. I could recall all the events that day, but I don't know, that doesn't seem necessary for the conversation. But at first, those first few days, I would not leave my mother's side.
Yeah.
I was scared that she was going to do something or hurt herself in some way.
And that is I just want to pause there, because that is such a common reaction, not just among young people, but I know that when my brother died in 2014, I was so terrified of my youngest brother. He was traveling. I didn't want him to travel. I wanted everybody to stay put where they were, because you're so terrified.
Yeah.
As a young person, though, you were 17 or 16 at the time?
I was 16.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Does that fear stay with you still?
Not really. At first, I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror because I have his eyes, and they were just staring at me. So it was really hard to find myself again after that.
Let's talk about that, Stephanie. How did you find yourself? You were so young.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't really found myself to begin with, so because I was 16. But I don't know, it was just hard for me to just look at myself and all the features that I had
Like your
that were
father.
his. And
Wow.
I mean, I would look at pictures, and of course, like, I would think about him, and then I would see my face, and then it would turn into his face, and then I would see him in that state. And so it was just a weird balance of being like, that's not him right now, like, this is my face, like, and then I would try to make expressions at myself and be like, oh, yeah, it's my face.
What was it like for you? Because it's true, Stephanie looks so much like Bob. I mean, now that she really does.
Yeah.
Because there's this other thing that happens psychologically. You were concerned that Bob may complete suicide, right? That's why you checked on him. That's why you were constantly worried about him.
Right.
And that can be not only just deeply stressful, but a tremendous burden that is up to you to keep your spouse alive.
Right.
So when this happened, I call it that anticipatory grief, where you feel like that shoe is going to drop at some point. It does. What's your process?
I started actually having like night terrors before he even passed. I would wake up screaming because in my dream I had found him and he may have had taken his life in that dream, or something terrible, traumatic had happened. And I begged him, I said, don't put me through this. You have so much to live for. And he just was so, he couldn't crawl out of that darkness, and cried on more than one occasion asking me, why don't you just leave me? Why do you stay? And I shared with him that, I loved him. I didn't marry him to leave him if he became sick. And if he had a cancer diagnosis, that wouldn't force me to leave. So just because he had a mental health diagnosis didn't.
Was Bob seeing a therapist?
He did have a therapist that he was seeing after the first suicide attempt, and he was seeing a psychiatrist for some med management, but he didn't like how the meds felt. And I didn't know until 2 or 3 weeks before he died that he had stopped taking them altogether. He thought he wanted to see what ground zero was and then see if he could manage it from there. And it just became one of those, another responsibility for me on a daily basis to call him, to check on him, to send him like uplifting quotes that I would find online, just to try and keep him from slipping further down that rabbit hole. And it was really hard, because I didn't want him to leave us. I love him.
Were you surprised when
No.
he took his life?
No, in fact, that day, he was in such a dark place. I had gone to work, I had to go to work that day, and I gave him a kiss on the cheek when I left. And I told him I loved him, and I said, please call me if you need anything, I'll be here, and I can be here in 5 minutes' time. And I was talking to one of my dear friends who worked with me, and she knew she knew the challenges I was going through and that Bob was going through, and was very supportive. And I said, I don't know that I'll ever be able to stop it from happening. I can't be with him all the time.
Right.
And 1:15, 1:20 that afternoon, I got a call from Stephanie just screaming. And to this day, I still get launched back into that PTSD mode of fear. In fact, she called me the other day because her dog had run off, and she was hysterical. And it was that same
feeling. I know that feeling.
And my heart just sinks, and the adrenaline goes, and I just am like, what's going on? And it immediately brings me back there.
I talk about trauma, people who have endured a trauma that, many people can walk into a room and they start at zero, right? So it's these small increments when something happens, but people who have had deep trauma, you already start at a 7, and so anything that happens shoots you up to a 10, right? It's that response.
Right.
It's, after my mother had a stroke, I'd get a call, and I was like, it was a ridiculous response given a phone call, but it was that trigger of, oh my God, a new tragic thing has happened. And then after my brother died, of course, that was exacerbated even more. Stephanie, I want to hear from you, because I mean, you are near and dear to my heart anyway. I love you dearly, but from the therapeutic part of me, being 16, what is life like for you now? I mean, I know that you went through some things. You went to school. You had to stop for a little while. You went back, really trying to find your way. Did you get therapy?
Oh, yes.
So you went to a therapist. Talk to us about that process. I really want to hear from you what this has been like.
So I've been seeing my therapist since I was 12 or 13, so I didn't have to start with someone new.
Which is fantastic.
She knew everything that was going on. And then, of course, my mother had her number and was texting her updates. And I didn't want to go back to therapy yet. I wanted time for myself, but my mom pushed me to go, and I was
And it's what you needed.
I was like, I'm really mad about this right now. But I'm glad that I went, because, I mean, we still talk about it. She asks me questions occasionally.
Hasn't been that long, and I think that that's another misnomer about grief. I think it's probably one of the biggest I think grief is so misunderstood in our culture, because I think that we are told we get 3 days of bereavement in a lot of organizations. We're here in the U.S. We're like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and march forward. Where if we gave ourselves the space and the grace to feel our grief, because there is a difference between grief and mourning, right? Grief is the expression, the sadness, and mourning is really, all right, I now need to get coping strategies to integrate this incredible loss into my life. And we don't do that very well in our culture. I think a lot of us walk around with grief that is just sort of stuck, and it can manifest as anxiety, as depression, night terrors. It can actually manifest as disease in the body, right? We don't feel well, we're ill. And I know that you guys have done so much grief work, and I want to say that I'm so proud of you for that, because I think that is such a, it comes from a place of deep self-love when we understand that as human beings we are here to experience and to honor the feelings that come with that experience, where I think so many of us want to truncate that experience really, and just, I want to feel better more quickly, right? So I want to know where you are today. What has happened? And what I mean by that, has the death of your father and the grieving process and what you have done, the work that you've done, changed your perspective on your life?
It certainly has changed the perspective of my life. I mean, before he was gone, I was on a set path. I knew where I was going to school, what I was going to study, what I was going to do after and with my degree. But he passed, and I was left kind of struggling to pick a school. I don't know what I want to do. Like, everything's in the air now. And so I did go to a school, and it didn't work out, which was an internal battle of itself.
Of course.
That I didn't fit there and that I wasn't ready.
You were still in deep
grief. And I was angry. And I had some interesting decisions because of that. But now I'm in my second year at community college.
Yay!
Which I'm going right into another school after, which I'm excited about. But it's changed my relationships with people. I want to build.
In what way?
I want to build better relationships with people, because I regret not knowing so much about my dad. That
You made me cry.
So I try to just get to know people as best as I can, and insight into their lives and who they are, so that I know who they are, and I can't really lose them if I know them.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Karen, how about you? How has it changed? I just have to say that I know that you are now engaged, which is amazing, and we can't get into that beautiful love story, but that you opened your heart up to love again.
I did.
How has it changed your perspective on your own life?
It's really forced me to examine sort of the pace that I was living my life at. What was most difficult for Bob was slowing down and being here in the present moment. And I have always loved nature, and found myself, when I was supporting him through his illness, gravitating towards therapeutic walks, and following his death, I found myself doing that even more. COVID hit 6 months later. We were in isolation,
Which just had to have intensified
absolutely.
the horridness of the grief, because we
Right.
need to, it's so important to be with people, right, and have that connection,
Right.
and now you are in solitude.
Right. So it's really, it's just really caused me to be more mindful and grateful for every moment I have. I wake up in the morning, if I don't get my list of things I want to do done, that's okay. Tomorrow's another day. And yes, I did find another person. I wasn't looking, but he happened upon my life, and just
I definitely nudged a lot.
Oh, we had the nudge.
That's right. She
I was
said,
like, just have him over.
Mom, you really
fine.
should. You really should go out on a date with him. And I'm like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And then, I got to know this person, and I thought, wow, maybe there's more here I should, explore. And it just evolved completely organically. I wasn't looking for something.
Yeah.
So,
but you let it in.
Yeah.
And because I think that, at the core, the essence of who we are is love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can get very fearful, become very fearful of life, and especially when something so tragic happens. And I think the two of you, just knowing you, but also your stories, the way that you've opened up, to deepening relationships at such a young age, and to know how important that is, and to you to love. And I think something else I want listeners to hear, that with suicide, people don't want to die. They don't want to live with the pain. And there are people who choose to take their life, and of course there is free will, and they can do that. And then it is those of us left here that really have to rebuild. And I just want to thank you for sharing this story, because I think opening up to, I think that when there is a trauma, we can close down or we can open up. And in that opening up and that surrendering, which isn't giving in, but is opening up to life, that we can understand how truly magnificent and precious life actually really is. So I want to thank you guys for coming today. Is there anything else you'd like to say to listeners that I haven't asked? Anything at all that you feel like?
I think the one thing that I've learned in this whole process is suicide, by its very nature, is difficult to understand.
Yeah.
And it's easy for people to make assumptions about an individual's selfishness in making that choice. And I've shared with Stephanie and her brother Adam, Bob's children, that he wasn't, like you said, he wasn't thinking about them. He just wanted to end his pain. And that we can choose to remember him one of two ways: the way he died or the way he lived. And
It's beautiful.
he lived, he was a generous, beyond measure individual. He was kind, he was well loved, and that's the person that helped to create them, and that's who they are at their core as well.
Yeah. So anything you'd like to say to any young people that might be watching this who've lost a parent?
It's an incredibly difficult journey, especially in the beginning. But the only way to get through it is to get through it. You can't close off. You have to force yourself to be a person again, which is hard to do. But the sooner you realize that you have people around you that want to help you, the easier it gets.
And let the tears flow. Let the tears
Give
pour
room
out.
for the grief.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I told them many times, when I would cry, she would want to comfort me and tell me, "It's okay, Mom, don't cry." And I'd say, crying is helping me heal. It's just love manifested in a new way. And I have cried gallons, I'm sure, gallons at least, of tears in the past 4 years. And I think that's truly what's helped me get to where I'm at.
100%. And I will end this interview on this note, that we can only digest emotion through the heart. You cannot think a feeling, you can only feel a feeling. And if we do not allow the feeling, then it goes somewhere. And that's what I was saying earlier, it gets stuck.
Right.
So thank you both for being here.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
us.
Bob, wherever you are, I know you're with us.
Thanks, Susan. We love you.
I love you guys too.